Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. This is the third episode of story in which the third Hokage finally resolves to do something about Naruto's treatment, and he seeks the assistance of someone known for influencing things from the shadows. When Naruto has everything he needs, including an elder brother who will do anything to protect him, what could possibly go wrong? Please subscribe and smash the like button. Now, let's jump right in. Can someone please explain why we are doing this? Aizo asked curiously as he leapt from another tree. Naruto, who was traveling alongside him, decided not to try and answer that particular question. Aizo always asked this kind of question on the journey to a mission location, and the blonde had learnt that no matter what the answer was, it would only lead to some form of comment about why the dingo was the superior canine species. The Jinchuriki adjusted his fox-styled ANBU mask that he was required to wear on this mission, much to his pleasure. He hated being officially recognized as a jonin, and it hadn't even been 2 days since Kakashi passed them all against his will. It had been rather funny to learn that Sasuke had remained unconscious for several hours, if only the same could be said about Sakura. He and Aizo had to avoid the pink-haired girl for the entirety of yesterday. But now they were here, away from the village and that damnable rank of genin, on a steady course towards grass country. Even Naruto wasn't exactly sure as to why the Hokage felt the need to actually send him, Aizo, and Kana to a supposed trap, but he wasn't going to ask stupid question and forfeit the mission to someone else. He was going to make the most of these few days as an ANBU again. Kana, who was leading ahead of them, sighed irritably from behind her ANBU mask. "We are doing this because the Hokage has tasked this mission to us and us alone," she answered. "Okay, I understand that much. But if it's our mission, why the hell is she here?" he asked, pointing to the woman traveling behind them. "Hey, I have a name you know," said woman shouted at him. Aizo turned to glare at her from behind his own unique ANBU mask. In reality, he didn't have a problem with her tagging along at all, especially since she was quite attractive. No, Aizo simply had a problem with the Hokage not making up his mind. If the old geezer wanted him and Naruto to be genin, then they would be genin, but they couldn't be ANBU at the same time. Too many people would find them out. He took a deep breath to calm himself. He didn't have the right to take out his frustration on the tag-along. It wasn't her fault and she shouldn't suffer for it. But that didn't mean he wasn't going to ogle her every now and then. She was an odd character if he had ever seen one, with her dark violet hair done up in some weird fan ponytail style. Her light brown pupilless eyes that always had an unnerving glimmer of insanity, and her clothing choice made her intentions questionable. The woman was dressed in a long tan overcoat, a mesh bodysuit that stretched from her neck to her thighs, pale gray shin guards, and a dark orange miniskirt. Overall, it left very little to the imagination and probably offered little protection. On the plus side, it made watching her jump from tree to tree all the more enjoyable, and Aizo was making the most of such a wondrous opportunity. Unfortunately, the woman took notice of the fact that he had been watching her for some time. "Are you checking me out?" she asked with a mischievous grin. Aizo shrugged nonchalantly. "So what if I am? I hold more authority than you on this mission, so you can't really order me to stop," he said casually. "Well, you can look all you want, but it'll cost you to touch him. And you will need to start calling me by my name if you plan on getting in my good graces," she said, grinning like an idiot the whole time. "And your name would be?" Aizo asked, waving his hand in an expectant manner. "The sexy and single snake mistress of Konoha, Anko Mitarashi," the now named Anko exclaimed happily. "Single, you say?" "How intriguing," Aizo said thoughtfully. Aizo kinda growled, glaring at the boy. "Oh, what now? Do you have something against me making casual conversation with our teammate?" he asked. "No. But I do have a problem with you trying to hook up with someone you are too young for," Kana said seriously. "You know, age is just a number when you're a shinobi," Anko said casually, winking at Aizo. "I'm afraid I will have to disagree with you there, my dear. Age is clearly a word," Aizo said sagely. "Oh my, I fear you are correct." Perhaps you will find it in your heart to not punish me so harshly at our next resting point. I promise I'll be a good girl from now on and not make such a stupid mistake ever again, Anko said dramatically. Aizo and Anko stared at each other for several seconds before bursting into hysterical laughter. Naruto ever so casually moved himself further away from his brother while Kana simply groaned and considered running into a tree. I'm surrounded by idiots, the black-haired woman muttered. You love us and you know it. Our idiocy changes nothing, the blindfolded boy said happily. Isn't that right, Fox Boy? He asked Naruto. As a security measure, Naruto actually had a code name while working as an ANBU, and since Konoha liked to name their ANBU after their respective masks, Naruto was given the code name of Fox. It wasn't exactly the best of code names given the circumstances, but it did the job for now and that's all that mattered. So long as no one linked the Fox mask to the QB, they would be fine. I'm not joining in on this. No matter what I say, you will continue to mess around with Anko-san until Kana kicks your ass. I'm keeping myself safe from the imminent chaos, Naruto replied calmly. Geez brat, no need to be so formal, Anko said before turning to Kana. By the way, what exactly is this mission we're going on? She asked seriously. You don't know? Kana asked, narrowing her eyes on the purple-haired woman. Not really. The Hokage just kinda assigned me to your team as backup and said to follow your orders, she replied, scratching her head sheepishly. Kana groaned mentally. She was going to kill Sarutobi when they got back from this. We are heading to Grass Country to attend a potential peace meeting with IWA. We're almost certain that it's a trap, but should it be the real deal, we will be the ones to represent all of Konoha. That means you will have to be respectful, Anko-san, she explained calmly. Wow, you and Blondie really need to loosen up. You're both too formal, Anko said casually. We just passed the border of Fire Country. We should reach the meeting point in around an hour or so, Naruto stated. Good to know. But a word of warning, Grass Country is not a forgiving place. A large majority of it is covered in dense forests, the rest in grassy fields, but the entire landscape is split apart by multiple rivers and ravines. Don't be surprised if the ground suddenly ends, Kana explained clearly. Where in Grass Country is this meeting being held? Aizo asked. Within one of the more open fields, there's an old military post that was built by IWA during the Third Shinobi War. It's long since been abandoned, but I suppose that IWA still wants some form of home field advantage should things turn ugly. What exactly are we planning to do if it's an ambush? Anko asked. I don't know yet. We weren't given specifics for this mission, it was simply to show up and assess the situation. Once we arrive, we can plan ahead for how to deal with whoever IWA sends. Is it even safe to have a fourth member on this mission? No offense, Anko-san, but there might be some confidential information revealed in this meeting that you are not privileged to know, Naruto stated politely. No offense taken, brat, I know I'm only a special jonin. But don't worry about your secrets, the Hokage already informed me of a lot of stuff regarding this team, mainly who you three are, Anko replied cheerfully. Aizo, Kana, and Naruto all turned to stare at her curiously. Really? They all asked in unison. Anko nodded enthusiastically. Yep. It really surprised me too, just to let you know. I was kinda bummed about having two kids hold authority over me, but it doesn't seem so bad so far, she said. I'm surprised that the old geezer trusts you that much. Even the ANBU aren't privileged to that much information about us. I mean, sure, they can make all the assumptions they want, but they are never given a clear answer, Aizo said casually before turning to stare blankly at Anko. Whose dick did you have to suck? He asked dryly. Anko turned to the boy with a perverted grin and an all too frightening gleam in her eyes. No one's, yet. But if you're making an offer, I'm sure we could come to some arrangement, she said, licking her lips. I honestly can't tell if you're playing with me or not, Aizo admitted. I haven't even started playing with you yet, Anko said with a wink. Aizo turned to Kana. I like this one, can we keep her? He asked. Kana suppressed her growing desire to kill Aizo, reminding herself that he was technically her son. It just didn't help that he had to be the perverted one out of him and Naruto. No, Aizo, we cannot keep her. I'm sure she has her own duties back in the village, and you are still supposed to be a jonin, she said sternly. Ah, you ruin all my fun, Aizo whined childishly. That's what mothers are for, sweetie, she replied cheerfully. The group quickly settled into a calm silence as the trees slowly began to be replaced by colossal-sized mushrooms, each one easily as tall or large as a normal tree. The most surprising thing was the smell, since it stunk worse than any sane person could possibly imagine. Aizo even pulled his scarf back over his mouth and nose, while Kana and Naruto simply acted as if nothing was wrong. Anko was a different story. Holy shit, this place stinks, she exclaimed in disgust, holding her nose. Don't you torture people for a living? Surely you've smelt worse than this, Kana said. But it's funny when they piss themselves. This is just cruel, making me run through this forest, Anko replied. You didn't need to accept this mission. I still don't even know why the old man let someone like you come with us, Naruto said in a bored tone. What's that supposed to mean, brat? The snake mistress asked harshly. Is this because I'm not a member of Root? Kana sighed. You're a candidate, aren't you? She asked in an annoyed tone. Anko smirked as she pulled a small metal plate from her weapons pouch, the kanji for Root clearly engraved on its surface. Sure am. This mission is my field exam of sorts, so how I do here will determine if I get accepted or not. The reports from you three will also help if you put in a good word, she said, making sure to add a bit of hopefulness to the last part. Aizo, Naruto, and Kana all nodded in understanding as they continued through the forest. It hadn't taken long for the Hokage and Danzo to change Root into a well-funded and more sizable organization. Alongside Danzo's recruitment methods, Hiruzen had started offering candidates from Konoha's official Shinobi forces and specially selected individuals with promise. This all ended with the dramatic growth of Root, as well as the development of new Root factions. So far, there were only 3 factions in total, consisting of Root, Fall, and Stem. The 3 Uzumakis belonged to the faction known as Fall. This faction consisted of individuals who were highly skilled in various forms of combat that could be traced to other hidden villages. They were used on missions that required there to be no link to Konoha whatsoever, which were more often than not nothing but simple assassination tasks. The other 2 factions were larger and more effective overall. Root remained as the body of the entire organization, serving as the main task force for missions, while Stem served as the medical force for both Root and Fall. The Hokage had made the decision to create a medical-based faction in order to reduce casualties and increase the productiveness of the organization overall. Danzo had seen the usefulness of having more trained medic ninja, and so he didn't argue with it. Members from the 3 factions were easy to tell apart, so long as they were working their shift. Root members all wore a blank ANBU mask with the kanji for Root printed on it. Stem member all wore the same mask but with a green stripe going horizontally across it, and Fall members all had the right to wear a personalized ANBU mask to make them unique. In the end, it didn't change very much when it came to how Root as a whole functioned, it simply made it more reliable. So which faction are you planning to join? Aizo asked curiously. Anko shrugged. Don't know yet, perhaps I'll just stick it out as a grunt for a while. I'm not sure if I have the skill to be accepted into Fall, and I sure as hell ain't no medic, so Stem is out of the question, she said casually. Well, if you do a good job on this mission, I'll be sure to put in a good word or 2 for you, Aizo said as he gave her a thumbs up. You would do that for me, really? Anko asked in mock surprise. Sure, but it'll cost you, he answered, a perverted grin that, thankfully, she couldn't see. Oh really? And how am I expected to pay you off? Will it be all up front or will there be a payment plan? She asked with her own perverted grin. Will you two shut it already? Kana snapped. It's bad enough that Aizo is a pervert on his own. I don't need you encouraging him, Anko. Hey, he started it, Anko defended. You played along, Aizo countered. I don't care who started it or who's playing along, I'll finish it. Kana growled angrily. If we kill them now and get our story straight, I'm sure we could pass it off as a necessary loss, Naruto suggested to Kana. That's cold, bro, real cold. I thought we were friends, the older sibling said in mock hurt. But I guess that's what happens when you have a giant fox sealed inside you. I wonder if you'd be better if it was a dingo instead. I wonder if the Hokage is having as much trouble as I am, Kana muttered irritably as she ignored the argument between her sons. Sometimes she wondered what possessed her into accepting being adopted into the Uzumaki family. The Sandaime Hokage took a deep puff of his pipe as he calmly observed the numerous jonin that had gathered in front of him. All of them were here to report on what potential jonin teams had passed, even though he already had a good idea on which teams had succeeded. He was the one who decided on team placements after all. So, which teams passed? He asked calmly. A random jonin stepped forward and bowed slightly to him before clearing his throat. Team 1 failed. They lacked neither the skill nor mental fortitude to be shinobi, he stated, stepping back into the crowd. It continued like this for several minutes, with each potential jonin instructor stepping forward and giving a brief explanation as to why their team failed before rejoining the small group. Hiruzen felt himself sigh at each failed team, coming once again to the painful realization that the academy curriculum had become disgracefully lax. Oh well, just another thing to add to our plans, he thought tiredly. Hiruzen looked up when Kakashi stepped forward, not even bothering to bow or take his lone eye off of the small book in his hand. Team 7, consisting of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, Naruto Uzumaki, and Aizo Uzumaki, under the instruction of Kakashi Hatake, passed. They only did so by the skin of their teeth, but I can see potential in each of them, the silver-haired Cyclops stated, struggling to keep a straight face as he stepped back. Several of the other jonin all gasped and began murmuring amongst themselves. Not once had Kakashi ever even gotten close to passing a jonin team in the few years that he had been a jonin sensei candidate. The concept of famous copy ninja actually training any jonin at all, let alone the last Uchiha, was an exciting thought. With a jonin that skilled teaching them, the village was sure to gain several new skilled shinobi. Wait, who is Aizo Uzumaki? I thought only that child had that name, a random jonin said, spitting out the word child. Oh yes, Aizo. He is Naruto's adopted brother, Hiruzen replied casually, earning some gasps. You allowed someone to adopt him, someone shouted. No, I allowed Naruto to adopt Aizo into the Uzumaki family, the old Sarutobi said with a shrug. What? You allowed that demon to corrupt another child, another unimportant jonin all but screamed. The Hokage leveled a glare on the man, releasing a small amount of Ki that instantly froze everyone in the room. I would appreciate it if you refrained from referring to Naruto like that, lest I lose my patience with you people. And for the record, Aizo agreed to being adopted, so you are not to make any bold accusations of Naruto, he said sternly. Now, I want the reports for the final teams. Any further outburst will result in demotion or outright removal from the shinobi forces, depending on how I feel at the time, Hiruzen stated calmly, recalling his killing intent. A young woman with long black hair and striking red eyes stepped forward. She was dressed in a red mesh armor blouse with only one sleeve covering her right arm, and a mid-thigh length dress of sorts that appeared to be made out of large bandages. She bowed slightly to the Hokage before standing to give her own report. Team 8, consisting of Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, and Hinata Hyuga, under the instruction of Kurenai Yuhi, passed. They work well as a team and possess excellent skills as trackers, she stated calmly before stepping back. Hiruzen nodded slightly. Team 9 is still in rotation, so we will move on to Team 10, he said, motioning to the next jonin. A tall man with brown eyes, short black spiky hair, and a beard stepped forward. He was garbed in the standard Konoha jonin uniform with the addition of a light blue sash with the kanji 4 fire on it. He, much like Kakashi, decided to forego the respective bow, and instead took a drag of his cigarette. He either didn't notice or didn't care about the glare that Kurenai sent his way. Team 10, consisting of Ino Yamanaka, Choji Akimichi, and Shikamaru Nara, under the instruction of Asuma Sarutobi, passed. They have a firm grasp of teamwork, even if they don't make use of their abilities without substantial motivation, he said casually. The Hokage stared at his son curiously. Are you sure a team made up of such unmotivated individuals is worth passing? I do not want to risk casualties simply because they would rather act like children than do what needs to be done, he said seriously. Isn't that a little harsh, Lord Hokage? I mean, they are still children, Kurenai reasoned. No. They gave up their childhood the moment they accepted the symbol of the hidden leaf. If they wish to act like children, they have clearly chosen the wrong profession. This is a warning to the rest of you as well. You will train your jonin teams properly from this moment onwards. I will not condemn such young shinobi to death because of your own soft-heartedness, Sarutobi said with narrowed eyes. All of the present jonin were taken aback by that announcement, except for Kakashi since he had already had a long discussion with the Hokage the previous day. Most were shocked that the normally kind-hearted Hokage had suddenly become so cold and calculated, even to the point of robbing jonin of their childhood. Asuma had a feeling of déjà vu as he realized that this was much the same way his father acted during the Third Shinobi War. I hope you all understand and take my warning seriously. For now, you are all dismissed. Teams will begin taking missions a week from now due to some complications with Team 7. I suggest you use this time to start training them, the Hokage said calmly. Not so fast, Hiruzen, a croaking voice said from the corner of the office. Everyone turned to look at Hiruzen's old jonin teammates and elders of the council, Koharu Udatane and Hamura Mitokado. Koharu, an elderly woman, walked up to the Hokage's desk, Hamura following close behind her. They both stopped in front of their old teammate and Koharu pulled a sizable file out from under her robes. I believe that you have some explaining to do in regards to that boy you placed in the Uzumaki family. I don't understand how you thought you could hide something like that monster within this village, but I will not stand for it, the woman said sternly. Elder Koharu, what are you talking about? Kurenai asked gently. That child, Izo Uzumaki, is a former lab experiment of the traitorous Orochimaru. This file contains information on the boy that was salvaged from the laboratory he was found in, and let me assure you, it is not comforting, the elder explained. So, you found out about Izo? But what makes you think I need to explain anything? The boy has already proven himself to be loyal to the village in his caring for Naruto, Hiruzen said calmly. You old fool. This boy cannot be trusted, and from what this file says, I suggest that he be taken and trained as a weapon. You may have stopped us from using the Jinchuriki, but this creature has no right to be allowed to freely roam this village, Hamura stated coldly. Sarutobi chuckled lightly as he took another puff from his pipe. Am I to assume that the information of what Izo is will be known to the public shortly, he asked, receiving a nod from his teammates. That's right, Hiruzen. The people have a right to know what that boy is should he be free to walk the streets, Koharu replied. Oh dear, such trouble you have caused me, however will I cope with it all, Hiruzen said sarcastically. I suppose there is no point in hiding Naruto's secret either, he is only going to be targeted as Izo's brother. Therefore, effective immediately, the law I passed regarding the Kyuubi Jinchuriki is nullified. Go and tell whoever you like, he said cheerfully. What game are you playing here, Hiruzen? Have you finally gone senile? Hamura asked worriedly. In all honesty, Koharu and Hamura were not planning on making all of the information known to the public. There were certain things that should remain under wraps. But this was not the reaction they had expected from the Hokage. They were hoping to simply use this newfound information to manipulate him, to turn him to their way of thinking. That plan was now shot to hell. I assure you that I have not gone senile. But I will say this, should anyone, shinobi or civilian, make any move to harm either Naruto or Izo after this information is revealed, I will crush them. Those boys are loyal shinobi of the leaf, and I will not stand for people who would condemn them for things out of their control. So keep that in mind when you go preaching about the demon and monster brothers, because I will slaughter anyone that dares to attack a fellow shinobi of Konoha, Sarutobi said sternly, putting pressure on the room's occupants with his chakra. Now get out, before I change my mind, he said quickly, emptying the room faster than the Yondaime Hokage could move. I see your teammates fell for it, Danzo said casually as he emerged from the shadows. Hiruzen smirked victoriously. Indeed they did. It seems we will finally be able to begin to initiate our plans, once the team returns from their diplomatic mission, that is, he said with a relaxed sigh. How much information did you reveal to them? The crippled elder asked. Not much, but just enough to make people see Aizo as a monster, the Hokage replied. When do you plan on making Naruto's identity known? The Warhawk asked curiously. As soon as the village is so sure that the boys are monsters. The very moment that it will crush them all the most and shatter. The beliefs they are so sure of, the beliefs born from hatred and lies, Sarutobi said with an almost evil gleam in his eye. And when the leaves of the village are at their weakest, the roots will come forth to cleanse the rot, Danzo stated stoically. And you ruined the moment by going all biblical, Hiruzen muttered. Danzo glared at his rival. Still such a child. Even after being so serious in front of your shinobi, you can't help but reduce yourself to immaturity, he said coldly. Whatever. So, did you manage to contact our friend? The Hokage asked curiously. I did. It wasn't easy, that man never stays in one place for very long and is quite skilled in hiding himself, the elder replied. So what did he say? Hiruzen asked. Why not ask him yourself, Danzo said as he turned to the middle of the office. Both elderly men watched as a large mirror formed itself out of water and hovered in the center of the room. It rippled slightly as a figure appeared within it. It was a very young-looking man with short gray hair and pink pupilless eyes, a large stitch-styled scar running down from his left eye to his chin. He appeared to be wearing a dark green poncho and held a hook-ended staff with a large flower at its end. Hello, Hokage Dano, the man greeted politely. Hello to you too, Mizukage Dano, or should I just call you Yagura? Sarutobi asked with a kind smile. Just Yagura will be fine, the former Mizukage said politely. I have information in regards to Kirigakure, he said. Oh really? Please, by all means, do tell, Hiruzen said, resting his chin on his hands. Very well, Yagura began. The Jinchuriki of the Rokubi has returned to the village, and I believe that he will be attending the upcoming Chunin exams, he explained. The Hokage frowned at that. I fear that these upcoming Chunin exams will have more than just Jinchuriki as a surprise, he thought worriedly as he continued to listen to Yagura's other reports. So long as there wasn't some Bijou deathmatch in the middle of Konoha, then the exams would go as planned. The meeting is being held inside that? Naruto asked with wide eyes. Yes, it is. This is the military outpost that IWA created in Grass Country. It was the only one that has never been raided since the Third Shinobi War, mainly due to the fact that no one is game enough to risk getting caught in it should it turn out to be one giant death trap, Kana explained. Everyone was standing on the cliff face edge of one of Grass Country's larger ravines, looking straight at the literal fortress suspended between either side of the ravine. It was a large cylindrical, tower-like structure with two sturdy stone bridges extending from its middle and connecting to each side of the ravine. It also seemed that the bridges were the only things holding up the entire structure. I can sense large clusters of explosives on each of the bridges. They weren't recently set, so I think it's safe to assume that they are old, probably back from the Third War when they planned ahead of a raid from Konoha, Aizo said casually. How much explosives? Kana asked curiously. I'm not sure on the exact amount or even how powerful they are, but it's safe to assume that it's more than enough to blow the bridges. If we're in there and they go off, we will not be getting out alive. The entire structure has been built for the purpose of a trap. As soon as that thing hits the ground, it will implode on itself, crushing us inside, he explained. Damn, IWA really went all out with this thing. And to think, they want to hold a diplomacy meeting here of all places, Anko said in surprise. Can you sense anyone inside, Aizo? Kana questioned. Yeah, 2 people, but something isn't right about it. There were at least 3 other chakras in there before we got here, but they're gone now. You picking up anything strange, bro? Aizo asked Naruto. We're too far away for me to get a proper reading on things, but I can definitely feel that one of the people in there is hostile. They're leaking out hatred like you wouldn't believe. The other one, though, they seem to be more afraid than anything else, the blonde replied. Sounds like a hostage trap. But that doesn't make much sense given the circumstances, Kana said thoughtfully. Does this mean we're abandoning the mission? Anko asked sadly. No, it just means we are gonna have to use a little more tact, and perhaps a decoy scout, Aizo answered. I hope you aren't suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Kana said dangerously. You're damn right I'm suggesting that. It is obviously the safest way to go about this mission, if we don't want to all die a horrible death at the bottom of this ravine, that is, the ash-haired boy exclaimed. What is he talking about? Anko asked Kana. He plans to be a complete idiot, so it's probably best to just go along with it for now, the older woman said tiredly. It really isn't worth the argument to go against him. Thanks for agreeing with me, Mom, Aizo said happily. I am not agreeing with you. I am simply not going to argue with you, she replied. You are the weirdest family I've ever met, the snake mistress said blandly. You have no idea, Naruto drawled. All right then, I'm off. Aizo exclaimed gleefully as he ran towards the bridge. We're just gonna let him go in alone? Anko asked in disbelief. Yep, Naruto and Kana said in unison. Lord Hokage sent me on a mission with a bunch of loonies, the snake user thought to herself as she watched her remaining teammates sit down on the grass lazily. She soon followed their example, but that didn't help to ease her curiosity. Anko just hoped that the mission went well, because the price for failing a field exam mission as a candidate was usually death. Aizo hummed a random tune as he casually strolled through the halls of the IWA base. It wasn't nearly as impressive on the inside as it had been from the outside, with nothing but bleak hallways and empty rooms. Most of the tower was built in a maze-like fashion, probably to slow down anyone trying to escape should the explosives be triggered, but luckily Aizo didn't rely on his sight to get around. The tower had been built with such excessive amounts of chakra that it practically mapped itself out for Aizo, and he knew exactly where he was going. The only people who would be more useful on this mission would be the Hyuga, but Root had very few of those in its ranks, and they were all branch members of the clan. The main house of the Hyuga clan were not the kind to so easily overlook one of their own going missing. Eventually, Aizo found himself walking into a large, well-lit room with a good-sized table at its center. At the table sat a young girl, probably a year younger than him, with an unreadable expression and the posture of a royal. Aizo paused in his step when the girl smiled nervously at him. This must be the one Naruto said was afraid, he thought as he took a few sniffs of the air. Aizo had to admit, the girl was definitely what he would classify as cute, and he suspected that she would become quite a looker in a few years. She had short black hair and pink eyes. She was wearing a red uniform with the right sleeve missing and a lapel over her right leg, fishnet tights, and a skirt. Aside from the missing brown flak jacket, it was standard IWA Shinobi attire. The girl continued to smile nervously at him as he walked up to the table and sat down opposite her. "Hello, are you the diplomat from Konoha?" she asked politely. Aizo stared at her blankly, not that she could tell due to his mask. He knew she was nervous, that much was obvious, but her words were forced and borderline shaky. The girl herself hadn't moved an inch since he had entered the room, and that was cause for concern. Normally, nervous people were twitchy or shaky, but this girl's body was the epitome of stillness. "I suppose I am." "What's your name?" he asked calmly, observing the girl intently. "I am Kuratsuchi, granddaughter of the Tsuchikage," she replied confidently. "And where are your teammates, Kuratsuchi-chan?" Aizo asked casually, making sure to add the suffix to gauge her reaction. Kuratsuchi narrowed her eyes at him, but that was all the reaction he got. "Do not refer to me as Chan. And it is polite to introduce yourself as well," she said sternly. I guess it is, isn't it? Well then, in that case, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Izo Uzumaki. Don't worry if you don't know me. I'm sure we can get better acquainted at a later date, he said dramatically, bowing low to the girl. But I still want to know where your teammates are, he said seriously, standing back up straight. I don't need teammates. I am fully capable of taking you down should you try to cause any trouble, she said with forced confidence. Very well, my dear, I'll take your word on it. But are you confident in your ability to take both me and my teammates down by yourself? Izo asked, returning to his seat. If I am required to, Kuratsuchi answered nervously. You really shouldn't lie to a censor, it never ends well, he said casually. A censor? She asked nervously. That's right, a censor, and a damn good one if I do say so myself. I can sense you, the 3 dead bodies in the next room, who I assume were your teammates, the explosives set around this room, and that guy hiding behind a weak genjutsu with a knife at your throat. Hell, I can even sense that paralysis seal stuck to your back, Izo listed off calmly. Kuratsuchi stared at him with wide eyes as the aforementioned man released the genjutsu, revealing himself to Izo with a sickening smirk on his lips. So you noticed me, eh, brat? Well, that's too bad. Now I'll have to make sure you really don't get out of here alive, the man said with a dark chuckle. He was rather plain in terms of appearance, having brown eyes and brown hair, lacking anything defining or unique. He was dressed in simply black pants and a dull white shirt. Other than the knife he held, he didn't have any other weapons, not that Izo felt that it would help if he did. The more surprising thing was that the man had very small chakra reserves, to the point that his ability to use a proper jutsu was questionable. Shame on you, sir. How dare you take such a beautiful girl hostage? 'Tis a crime, I tell ye. Izo yelled indignantly. The man and Kuratsuchi stared at him in confusion. Are you feeling okay? The girl asked worriedly. I'm fine. But do you want to know what's not fine? The fact that that man is from your own village. Oh, the horror, he exclaimed, gripping his chest in mock shock. Kana, Naruto, and Anko were all listening in through their earpieces, the latter of the 3 doing so with wide eyes. Is he mad? Does he not realize that his actions have the potential to start a war between our villages? Anko asked worriedly. Oh, don't worry, he is fully aware of that, he simply doesn't care, Naruto answered. He doesn't care? Why doesn't he care? More importantly, why the hell did we allow him to go in alone? The snake user asked frantically. We allowed him to go in alone because out of all of us, he is the most likely to survive should that tower fall, Kana replied calmly. As for why he doesn't care, well, let's just say that he doesn't view fighting the same way we do. To him, a war is nothing more than a large-scale game of death tag. Trust me when I tell you that he can get pretty scary when playing that game, the blonde explained. So he's insane? Anko asked bluntly. I thought you would understand him a little better considering the fact that you both have a history with a certain snake, Kana said casually. Anko absent-mindedly raised her right hand to her neck, flinching slightly as she rubbed the curse seal. That was permanently marked on her. I don't like to talk about that. Even with others like me, she said quietly. You probably should talk to him. If you're really nice, he might even be able to do something about that seal on your neck, Naruto suggested offhandedly. The purple-haired woman's head snapped towards the blonde so fast it probably hurt. He could remove it, she asked hopefully. Naruto shook his head. No, he doesn't specialize in removing seals. But there isn't a seal he's found that he can't modify and mutilate to his own needs. He even did several modifications to my own seal, and that thing is powerful enough to hold the QB, he replied. Is it worth it? She asked curiously. The blonde shrugged. It depends on the seal, really. Let him take a look at it sometime and he'll tell you what he's able to do with it, but I should warn you, Orochimaru's cursed seals were designed with servitude in mind, so any changes might not be to your liking, he explained calmly. Kana interrupted their discussion with a groan as she stood up. Izo is joking around too much. Come on, let's go and see if we can salvage the situation, she said as she began walking to the bridge. Wait, what about if the tower falls? Anko asked. Naruto, the black-haired woman, said simply. Naruto nodded and pulled out an elongated kunai with a red sealing tag wrapped around its handle. He threw it a few feet in front of him and disappeared in a red flash, reappearing several feet away with the kunai in hand before stabbing it into the ground. He stood up and grinned at Kana, giving her a thumbs up. Escape exit set, he said cheerfully. Good, let's go, she replied. Anko stood frozen in place for a few moments, her eyes wide in shock as she gaped at the blond boy. That was the Yandame's technique, she stammered out, pointing accusingly at Naruto. The Jinchuriki shrugged carelessly as he continued to walk behind Kana. Anko remained frozen for a little while longer before snapping out of her shock and running after her teammates. I am going to need a few drinks after this mission, she muttered mentally. And that is why the dingo is clearly the superior canine species. Aizo exclaimed loudly. Are you done yet? The man asked dryly. Aizo paused in his dramatics and stood up from his kneeling position, dusting himself off lightly before clearing his throat. Yes, now I'm done, he said simply, sitting back down. During this time, Kuratsuchi decided to give up all hope of being rescued from her situation. If the rest of this guy's team were as insane as he was, then they would be next to useless against her captor. She still felt ashamed for being so easily taken down by the man, even more so now that she knew for certain that her team was dead. The girl was interrupted in her thoughts by the large knife the man was holding pressing itself uncomfortably close to her skin. How did you know I was from IWA? The man asked with narrowed eyes, slowly dragging the blade over Kuratsuchi's neck in a shaving-like manner. Honestly? I didn't. It was just a lucky guess, Aizo answered cheerfully. Yep, I am definitely going to die, Kuratsuchi thought to herself. The man laughed lightly at Aizo's answer. What kind of ninja bases things like that on a guess? He asked mockingly. One of a kind, the boy exclaimed proudly. Oh well, not that it matters. By the time your team gets here, you'll be dead, and this pretty little thing will go missing mysteriously. When IWA finds the bodies of her teammates and the blood of a Konoha shinobi, all hell will break loose and any hopes of peace between our villages will be shattered, the man explained with a smirk. And how might I ask, do you intend to kill me? Not to sound cocky, but I am somewhat skilled, Aizo said in a bored tone. The man's smirk widened, almost into a vicious grin. For such a skilled sensor, you really suck at sensing proper genjutsu, he said darkly. Aizo didn't even have time to react as a knife was plunged deeply into his neck, the image of the man behind Kuratsuchi shimmering slightly before vanishing completely. I'll never forgive the Hidden Leaf for what they did in the war. Not after your Yandame Hokage slaughtered so many of us, the man growled quietly from behind him. Kuratsuchi watched as the masked boy collapsed forward onto the table, his blood pouring over and off of the smooth marble surface. She detested herself for admitting it, but that boy was her only real chance of escaping her captor, even if he was from Konoha. She couldn't really blame the man for interfering with the meeting. She too didn't like the idea of offering peace between IWA and Konoha. But peace was not the purpose of this meeting, and she wished that her captor could realize that. The mission was so simple it could have been given to a jonin team. They were to show up here, play politics for a little while, identify the Jinchuriki that Konoha were requested to send along, then use the tower's self-destruct to hold the other Uzumakis hostage until they were long gone with the Kyuubi container. That plan was now long since destroyed. Since her team was dead, she wouldn't have a hope in hell of figuring out who the Jinchuriki was on her own, and someone from her own village had decided to start a war because of a grudge. What a weakling. Figures Konoha would be pompous enough to only regard IWA as a minor threat. They should know better than to insult the likes of the Hidden Stone, the man proclaimed angrily. That wasn't very nice, Aizo said childishly, sitting himself back up in his chair, completely disregarding the knife and his own blood. The man took several steps back from the boy, his eyes wide in surprise. How the hell are you still alive? He shouted. Aizo looked down at the blood-covered table before reaching up and grabbing the knife still stuck in his neck. With a sharp tug, he ripped it from his throat, his blood pouring out profusely as he held the weapon out towards the horrified man. "I think you dropped this," he said casually. Kuratsuchi and her captor watched in barely contained horror as the boy's blood began turning ash white. Soon enough, Aizo's hand began to turn the same color, followed quickly by his entire body, clothes and all. He started to crack and crumble as if he was a deteriorating statue, until his right arm simply snapped off at the elbow, falling to the floor and bursting into a pile of ash. What the hell is going on?" the man asked shakily, staring wide-eyed at the disintegrating boy. "You know, for someone who uses genjutsu, you aren't all that good at noticing one," Aizo stated calmly as he walked into the room. The entire room began to warp slightly before everything phased back into reality. Kuratsuchi was still sitting frozen in her chair, and the pile of ash had vanished. Actually, that entire side of the table was completely undisturbed, as if Aizo hadn't even been in the room to begin with. The most notable change was that the man now standing off to the side, drenched in blood. Without a second thought, the man put his hands into a single seal. "Release," he exclaimed. The world once again warped before phasing back to reality. Kuratsuchi was still sitting in her chair, something that was quickly beginning to irritate her. The man was once again standing behind her with his knife at her throat, and Aizo was yet again sitting on the other side of the table with a small cup of tea. Kuratsuchi rolled her eyes. "Figures he'd be a skilled lunatic," she thought dryly. "Such a shame that you broke that one. I had such marvelous adventures planned, and a world all our own," Aizo said sadly, taking a sip of his tea. "Where the hell did you get tea?" the man asked in confusion. "Why, from the coffee machine, of course," the boy replied cheerfully. "This is another genjutsu, isn't it?" he asked bluntly. "Oh wow, you're getting so smart, aren't you? I'll tell you what, you get a gold star for effort. Keep up the good work and you'll get a cookie," Aizo exclaimed happily, giving the man a thumbs up. The man growled. "I'll kill you, brat," he yelled, breaking the genjutsu and charging forward. Aizo sighed in disappointment as his cup of tea disappeared and reality took over. He quickly extended his right arm towards the charging man, taking a brief moment of satisfaction when he found himself crushed down against the table by an invisible force. The masked boy stood from his chair and calmly placed his left hand on the man's head. Not moments later, the man struggling was halted. "What did you do to me?" the man asked fearfully as he found all of his energy leaving him along with most of his chakra. "You have a pitiful amount of chakra. I'm amazed you managed to kill Kuro-chan's teammates, but you probably had the element of surprise with them," Aizo said in disappointment, removing his hand from the man's head. Kuratsuchi glared at Aizo, a low growl escaping her lips. "Kuro-chan?" she asked dangerously. She didn't like it when he referred to her as Chan, and she sure as hell wasn't any happier about him shortening her name as if they were best of friends. It was simply too embarrassing and it needed to be stopped immediately. "Yes, Kuro-chan. That's what I'm gonna call you from now on, and no, you cannot convince me otherwise, no matter how good looking you are," Aizo replied, grinning at the girl. "I will have you killed for this," she said irritably. "I'm sure you will, but could you maybe hold that off until after our first date? I'd like to at least have a decent chance to get to know you first," he said casually. The girl stared at him with a deadpan expression. "You do realize that we are enemies, don't you?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "Sure do. But you know what they say, forbidden love is always worth it in the end," he exclaimed with a hint of perverseness. "I got taken down by a moron," the still incapacitated man groaned depressingly. Aizo turned back to where the man was still being crushed against the table, the invisible force being strong enough to crack the marble surface beneath him. "You're still alive? Your ribs should be crushed by now," the boy exclaimed in surprise. "Ha, like you could crush me. We're built tougher in IWA. Not like your pansy Konoha comrades," the man spat hatefully, straining himself to breath under the crushing pressure. "Well then, I'll have to remedy that, now won't I?" Aizo said irritably. Aizo extended his right arm towards the man again and clenched his fist. The man's would-be screams were caught in his throat as bloodied gurgles as his rib cage collapsed under the pressure, the marble table cracking in a spider web pattern around him. Kuratsuchi's eyes widened at the power the boy had so effortlessly displayed, his brutality striking a small amount of fear into her. She wasn't ignorant to the reality of being a kunoichi, and she was more than aware that the job entailed being surrounded by death, but this boy was on a whole different level than her. He had not only effortlessly slaughtered a man that had killed 3 Chunin-level ninja and captured her, but he had toyed with the man first. He had played around with him as if it were a game, and that made her worry for her own safety. Kuratsuchi knew that in her current position, there was literally nothing she could do to stop him should he decide to do anything unpleasant. If his earlier comments on her looks were anything to go by, then it was safe to assume that he found her appealing, and that was more than enough reason for her to panic. Every kunoichi knew the harsh reality of the world, the risk they were all taking, but it didn't make her feel any less nervous. Aizo nodded to himself at a job well done before turning on his heels and walking up to Kuratsuchi. He casually waved at her and sat himself on the table directly in front of her. "Well, Kuro-chan, I think it's time for you to do something for me," he said calmly. "What kind of thing?" she asked nervously. The masked boy pointed at the partially crushed man's body. "I want you to tell me if you know him, and then I'll have you answer some other questions," he answered. "Yes, I know him. He was a member of the explosion corps in Iwagakure. He made explosives for our shinobi, but he didn't have the chakra to actually fight. I'm surprised he could use genjutsu though," Kuratsuchi replied, never easing her intense stare at Aizo. "Okay, good to know. It also explains why he set up explosives around the room. Now, time for some other questions. What was the purpose of this meeting?" he asked seriously. Kuratsuchi felt a bead of sweat slide down her forehead. She wasn't exactly sure on how to reply to that question. If she lied, he would probably be able to pick it up, but if she told him the truth, she'd rather not think about what he would do. Then again, there was always the off chance that he was crazy enough to let her go, and she already knew that he found her appealing. Perhaps she could use that to her advantage. It was to try and organize a peace treaty between our villages. She lied with all the confidence she could muster. Aizo's somewhat casual and laid-back demeanor instantly dropped, being replaced by a cold and murderous aura. "I don't like liars, Kuro-chan, and I would hate to have to kill you for something as little as answers. So tell me the truth. What was the real purpose of this meeting, and why did IWA request all 3 Uzumakis to be present?" he asked emotionlessly. "If I tell you, will you let me go?" she asked nervously. "I won't make any promises, but it would definitely work in your favor," Aizo said simply. "Fine," she started with a defeated sigh. "We were tasked with identifying and capturing Konoha's Jinchuriki, the other Uzumakis as well if it was possible. If we couldn't capture any of you, then we were given orders to drop the tower with you all inside," she explained quickly. "Then why was he so convinced that you were actually here for peace talks? Didn't you try to explain the situation to him?" he asked, gesturing once again to the man's body. "He made a bold assumption and had already killed my team before we could explain anything to him," the girl replied. "And how does someone who can't even use jutsu manage to take down 4 IWA shinobi?" Aizo asked curiously. "He surprised us with some flash bombs and knocked me out. I don't know how he got my teammates, and I only woke up shortly before you got here," she admitted shamefully. "All right, back to the main subject at hand. What was IWA planning to do with my little brother if you happened to catch him?" he asked, glaring through his mask. "We were going to try and brainwash him to serve IWA, and if that didn't work, then we would simply kill him and reseal the QB into someone else," she answered. Aizo nodded at her answer. It definitely seemed like the kind of thing Iwagakure would do, and they sure as hell weren't above killing a child to get more power. A small smirk tugged at his lips as he stood up from the table, stepping up to Kuratsuchi and lowering his head down next to hers. "One more question," he began quietly, grinning at her discomfort. "Why are you pretending to be paralyzed when that seal on your back isn't even active anymore?" he asked curiously. Without a moment of hesitation, Kuratsuchi drove her left fist into Aizo's stomach, making the boy stumble back in surprise. Jumping to her feet, she quickly delivered a powerful chakra-enhanced punch to his face, knocking him back onto the table. She raced through several hand seals and took a deep breath as she glared at Aizo. "Yotan, quicklime congealing jutsu," she exclaimed, breathing out a large glob of a corrosive lava-like substance. Aizo quickly replaced himself with the body lying on the other side of the table, mentally sighing in relief as he watched the body get engulfed by the quicklime, trapping it onto the table. Rolling himself off of the table and onto his feet, Aizo quickly went through some of his own hand seals. "Hayatan, shattering ice spear jutsu," he said, pushing his right arm out towards the girl. Kuratsuchi was forced to throw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding the several massive ice spears that tore through the table, shattering the stone chair that was behind her. "Yotan, lava flow jutsu." The girl was once again forced to throw herself out of harm's way as Aizo spewed out a long steady stream of red-hot lava, melting the part of the floor she had been on. Kuratsuchi stumbled to her feet and stared at Aizo fearfully, wondering just what kind of mess she had gotten herself into. How can you use 2 Kekkai Genkai?" she asked shakily. Aizo smirked victoriously. "You would be surprised at what I can do when it comes to Kekkai Genkai. By the way, nice Yotan technique you got there. Mind if I use it later on?" he asked casually. "You expect me to believe that you can just use it without learning it first? You don't have the Sharingan, so I highly doubt that," Kuratsuchi stated smugly. "Well, you got me there. I certainly don't have the Sharingan, thank Kami for that. But I have a rather good understanding of nature-type jutsu, especially Kekkai Genkai nature types. Speaking of which, your grandfather, the Sandaime Tsuchikage, Anoki the fence-sitter, is well known for his Jinton Kekkai Tota, am I right?" he asked. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, her pink eyes still glaring a hole into his head. "I was merely wondering if you could tell me if I'm doing this right," he said simply. Before Kuratsuchi could ask, Aizo put his hand out in front of him as if holding an invisible ball. A small marble-sized sphere of energy appeared between his hands before a small transparent cube of energy expanded from it. Kuratsuchi's eyes widened to comical proportions as she stared at the small cube of energy. "That's not possible," she muttered mentally. Aizo thrust his arms forward, launching the cube straight towards Kuratsuchi. The black-haired girl reacted quickly, once again racing through hand seals and taking a deep breath. "Yotan, quicklime flow jutsu," she said quickly, spewing out a stream of the corrosive substance. The cube collided with the quicklime and instantly expanded in size, engulfing the entirety of Kuratsuchi's jutsu within itself and stopping mere millimeters in front of her. "Jinton, atomic dismantling jutsu," Aizo exclaimed cheerfully. The sphere of energy within the expanded cube erupted in a bright flash of light before the cube simply disappeared, along with Kuratsuchi's jutsu and a small section of the floor. Aizo steadied himself by putting his hands on his knees, panting slightly in exertion. Using those 3 jutsu consecutively in such a short time was a terrible idea on his part. "I can't go throwing Kekkai Genkai techniques around like that. At this rate, it'll kill me," he thought tiredly. "I need to limit myself and stop showing off like this. Nature shifting at this rate is just too damn costly." Kuratsuchi continued to stare wide-eyed at Aizo as she fell to her knees. Her breathing was a little haggard, but other than that, she was fine. She still had plenty of chakra left, but she couldn't use her Yotan anymore. She simply didn't have enough practice with it yet. She couldn't help but stare fearfully at her opponent, as if despite her own confidence, she knew she was going to lose. "What the hell is he? He just threw 3 different Kekkai Genkai at me, and he's only just now starting to feel an effect. The Hayatan should be long since gone, and there is no way he should know the Jinton," she thought in a slight panic. "Even if he's tired, I can't counter him with Yotan anymore, and I'm screwed if he uses Genjutsu." Kuratsuchi narrowed her eyes at the masked boy. She was a loyal kunoichi of IWA, and she would be damned if she allowed Konoha to have such a potentially powerful shinobi. Even if he wasn't actually the Jinchuriki that she was assigned to capture, he was still just as much of a threat. I won't let him leave here alive, she swore to herself. You know, Kuro-chan, I really don't want to kill you. So if you just do me a favor and surrender, that'd be great, Aizo said, his breathing slowly going back to normal. Kuratsuchi smirked smugly. Don't worry, you won't have to kill me, she said sweetly, putting her hands together in a single seal. Because I'm going to kill you, she finished. Aizo felt her quickly flare her chakra, which was followed by two massive explosions that rocked the entire tower. Gravity suddenly lost its effect as the large earth structure began to plummet into the ravine. Aizo looked over to Kuratsuchi and saw her drawing in as much earth as she could from around her, forming it into a large cocoon of sorts. You bitch, he yelled angrily. If he survived this, he was going to kill her. Outside the tower just before the explosions, I'm going to kill him. Kana screamed. Calm down. I'm sure he had his reasons, Naruto said unconvincingly. He knew that Aizo probably just did it for a joke, but he had to at least try to get his brother off the hook. No one deserved the level of ass-kicking that Kana could dish out. Does he do this kind of thing often? Anko asked curiously. Kana and Naruto sighed. Yes, they answered in unison. The three of them were currently standing on the bridge connected to the tower, in front of the large passageway leading into the base. There was but one problem: Aizo had sealed the entrance with an earth wall. Normally they would be able to blast it down, but they didn't want to accidentally break the bridge, and none of them were proficient enough with earth nature chakra to take the wall down. So what are we going to do? The snake user asked casually. She personally didn't see a problem with Aizo locking them out of the tower. If he wanted to go lone wolf, that was his problem, just so long as he didn't fuck up the mission and get her killed for it. We could just wait for him to come back out. I doubt that anyone inside could actually beat him, unless he decides to show off, Naruto suggested. Knowing him, he's probably been showing off since the moment he found whoever's in there with him, Kana said, sighing irritably. We should get off of the bridge now. We can't get into the tower, and I'd rather not be on this thing should IWA decide to blow the bridges, the blonde said seriously. He really didn't want to get blown up today, not when he still had to taste Testachiraku's newest flavor of ramen. Yeah, good idea. I don't like the thought of falling to my death, Anko said before she was cut off by two large explosions that knocked her off her feet. The bridge beneath them crumbled and collapsed, dropping them into a freefall. Naruto wasted no time in grabbing onto both Kana and a screaming Anko, all three suddenly vanishing in a flash of red and reappearing back where he had placed his kunai. Kana and Naruto landed on their feet while Anko fell on her ass. Well, there goes Aizo, Naruto said dryly. He best hope he dies down there, Kana muttered as she watched the tower fall down into the ravine. You guys are really messed up. Isn't he your family? Anko asked in shock. Naruto and Kana turned to glare at the purple-haired kunoichi from behind their masks. You don't live with him, you couldn't understand, they said in perfect unison, freaking Anko out quite a bit. You two are creepy, the snake mistress muttered under breath. And you scream like a bitch, Naruto replied casually, making her blush in embarrassment. I already miss Aizo, she grumbled sadly. Don't worry, he won't die. Hopefully, Kana assured her. For now, let's start heading down there. Aizo might survive, but I doubt he'll be able to get back up here by himself, she said before she walked to the cliff's edge and began walking straight down the vertical cliff face. Naruto followed quickly after her, leaving a still slightly shaken Anko on her own. Her fear of falling to her death was a very well-kept secret, and now two more people probably knew about it. Maybe I can just kill them and tell Aizo they died in the explosion, she thought. She shook her head of that thought. They were high-ranking member of Fall, chances were they could kill her without breaking a sweat. Anko hesitantly walked to the cliff's edge. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she began to slowly walk down the cliff face. I do not scream like a bitch, she growled in embarrassment, blushing lightly as she walked after Aizo and Kana. Aizo groaned as he collapsed onto the massive pile of rubble beneath him, the only remnants of the tower that had practically been dropped on his head. His visible skin was a dark earthy color, and a good amount of his clothes were ripped and torn. His skin quickly returned to its more pale coloring as he relaxed himself. "Fuck, that hurt," he muttered tiredly. A low rumbling sound caught his attention, and he turned to see a section of the rubble get pushed apart, revealing a somehow still alive Kuratsuchi. She didn't look to be in the best shape, what with an apparently dislocated shoulder and a trickle of blood coming from her mouth, but she was still alive, and she didn't look too happy to see Aizo. Aizo forced himself to his feet, stumbling slightly. His ANBU mask had unfortunately been a casualty of the fall, meaning that Kuratsuchi now knew what he looked like, for the most part anyway. In reality, it didn't matter if she knew his appearance since she already knew his name, but it was more about the concept than the effectiveness when it came to ANBU masks. "How are you still alive?" the injured girl asked angrily. "I could ask the same of you," Aizo replied. Kuratsuchi sneered at him. "It doesn't matter. You're weak now, so I'll just kill you and be done with it," she growled. Aizo sighed exhaustedly. "This girl is one tough cookie, I'll give her that much," he thought to himself as he dropped into a lazy taijutsu stance, Kuratsuchi quickly doing the same. I wonder if she's single. Aizo waited patiently for Kuratsuchi to charge at him, probably in some form of female fury that many regarded as highly dangerous. He could understand her hesitance though. Having a dislocated shoulder was a definite handicap in a fight with someone whom you didn't know what was capable of. Unfortunately, or rather fortunately for his opponent, Aizo couldn't simply charge at her either. As it was, both of them had used too much chakra just to survive the fall, and both of them were suffering with the effects of that. Kuratsuchi was noticeably having trouble breathing, more than likely due to some internal injury she had sustained in the fall. That would also have explained the small amount of blood that had dribbled down her chin. Her arm being dislocated was also glaringly obvious, as was the drastic drop in her chakra reserves. In her current condition, Aizo estimated that she would put up about as much of a fight as Sakura. Then again, the IWA Kunoichi might manage to pull off some miraculous stunt and get the drop on him. Aizo winced slightly and gripped his left arm tightly to stop it from twitching. This did nothing to stop his arms from shaking slightly as he tried to calm himself down. Kuratsuchi, smirking at his apparent discomfort, was not helping him in this ordeal. He grit his teeth as the burning sensation worked its way down his arm before pulsing back up into his chest. This was not something he felt like dealing with at this particular time, and he really didn't want to just kill Kuratsuchi. He was still hoping that the situation could be salvaged, somehow. "What's the matter, nervous?" the girl asked smugly. She tried not to show it, but she was desperately hoping that he had exhausted himself trying to survive the fall. Kuratsuchi knew that she wouldn't be able to fight someone on his level in the way she was, not unless he was more injured than she was. "Nervous? Ha! Very funny, Kuro-chan. No, I'm not nervous, but I'm having a little bit more trouble than I expected. You really surprised me when you set off the explosives. Didn't take you for the suicidal type," Aizo chuckled. "Then again, I didn't expect you to answer my questions so honestly either, considering that the paralysis seal had worn off shortly after I entered that room. Why exactly did you give away so much information, if you don't mind me asking?" Kuratsuchi glared at him. "I might be loyal to my village, and I might agree that having another bijou in our possession would be best, but I will not condone the torture, brainwashing, or death of a child just so my village can win a pissing contest. It was the IWA Council that wanted your Jinchuriki, and the only reason my grandfather agreed to it was to shut them up. He didn't account for the fact that the Hokage would actually send the Jinchuriki," she explained angrily. Aizo quirked an eyebrow. "Why are you angry at us? You just said that it was all a scheme to get your hands on another Jinchuriki. If anything, I should be angry at you for planning to kidnap my brother," the blindfolded boy said irritably. "I'm angry because you idiots actually sent your damn Jinchuriki here, even when you had more than enough reasons to think it was a trap. What the hell was the Hokage thinking? Had you just sent some grunts instead, we could have easily disregarded our mission entirely and run off with no war-scale repercussions. But oh no, you guys had to be idiots. And now I'm stuck here fighting a freak of nature in hopes that I can still complete part of my mission. Kuratsuchi ranted loudly. Hey, I am not a freak of nature. I started off as a clone before slowly climbing the ladder out of the realm of normal. I do not even exist in nature's schematics. Aizo exclaimed childishly before bursting into a maniacal cackle. Kuratsuchi took a step back from the boy with a concerned expression. She had been noticing that his arms had progressively been twitching more and more as they talked, but his mad cackle and the disturbingly vicious grin that had suddenly plastered itself on his face was unnerving her more than anything else had. Are you okay? She asked apprehensively. Ah-ha-ha-hee-hee. Nope, but that's even better, he yelled madly before looking at her and tilting his head curiously. You tried to kill me, he said darkly, his voice sounding much deeper and more menacing than his earlier high-pitched mad scientist-like tone. An evil and ominous aura started to surround Aizo as his fingers started to twitch uncontrollably. Kuratsuchi felt sick. The boy's presence was unlike anything she had felt before. She had experienced killing intent from her grandfather, and although that had scared her shitless, it wasn't in any way similar to this. Aizo's mere presence, not even his killing intent, just his presence, was making her want to throw up until she died. It was a disgusting and sickening sensation that sent an uncomfortable chill down her spine. She chuckled nervously as she stepped further away from the clearly insane boy. It's okay, I'll just leave now, she said quickly. No, I think not, Aizo said sharply as his chakra spiked to terrifying levels, the ground around him cracking slightly under the sudden pressure and the temperature dropping several degrees. Kuratsuchi watched with wide fearful eyes as a long kunai flew down from seemingly nowhere and embedded itself directly in front of Aizo. In a flash of red, a new and far more powerful presence simply appeared out of thin air and collided with the blindfolded boy. Aizo was thrown back several feet before another flash of red appeared above him in midair and forced him into the ground. The older boy's sickening presence disappeared quickly after that, but it was merely replaced by an even more overwhelming aura of pure anger and malice. Naruto sighed as he stood up from a now unconscious Aizo, a paper sealing tag stuck to the older boy's forehead. You really shouldn't show off, you idiot, he mumbled irritably. He shook his head and took a deep breath, calming himself and drawing the Kyuubi's chakra back within himself, his crimson-red eyes fading back to blue. It wouldn't bode well if he became a beacon for potential enemies in the area, and with Aizo now out for a few hours they had lost a very large portion of their fighting power. The masked blonde turned around and saw that Kuratsuchi was still standing where she had been, not moving a single muscle as she stared at him worryingly. A small smirk tugged at his lips from behind the fox-styled ANBU mask. It was always somewhat amusing that the Kyuubi's chakra made people react that way, even when it was being completely filtered through his own reserves. No matter how hard he tried, the malicious nature of the Biju's chakra could never be taken away from the power. On the bright side, it didn't corrupt him in any way until he hit 3 tails, which was a definite plus in his books. Unfortunately, the girl had tried to kill Aizo, or at least that's what Naruto assumed since she was the only one still alive aside from the older boy. Then there was also the fact that she had not only witnessed him use the Hiruzen, even if it wasn't yellow, but also most likely now knew that he was the Jinchuriki. It was foolish to think she wouldn't be able to put the pieces together and come to an unsettling conclusion that had the potential to start a war between the villages. These facts, sadly, meant that Naruto would probably have to kill her to keep her silent. Kana and Anko quickly landed next to him, the latter of the two moving to check on Aizo much to the still conscious Uzumaki's confusion. The eldest of the group decided to overlook the action for the meantime, making a point to bring it back up for possible blackmail material at a later date. She turned to stare blankly at Kuratsuchi before turning questioningly to Naruto, who had one of his Hiruzen kunai gripped in his hand, obviously ready for the girl to make a run for it. Did she see it? Kana asked seriously. Naruto nodded. She saw, and she also knows what I am. Considering that Izo's mask isn't on him, I think it's safe to say she would be able to point him out to IWA. I'm fairly certain that he was showing off too, so leaving her with that information would not be advisable, he explained emotionlessly. The oldest Uzumaki nodded in understanding, not at all confused by the way that Naruto was talking. It was actually much safer for him to act and speak emotionlessly while working as a root member, since it was such the polar opposite of his normal persona. It would be much harder to try and connect an emotionless ANBU to a hyperactive jonin, even with the bright blonde hair. Izo, however, was more or less compromised now, even if the boy didn't care about it, and that was not something that Kana felt comfortable in leaving as was. She turned back to Kuratsuchi and placed a hand on the hilt of her sword, just in case. "Who are you?" she asked calmly. Kuratsuchi mentally cursed herself for not running away when she had a chance. She definitely couldn't outrun two perfectly healthy ANBU and a jonin, not to mention the short blonde one had used a technique that was disturbingly similar to the famed Hiruzen. The black-haired girl wouldn't go so far as to make bold assumptions from that alone, but it did raise some questions and unnerve her. From what they were saying, she could tell that the blonde was most definitely the Jinchuriki, no doubt about it, and that they were willing to kill her to keep that a secret. "I'm Kuratsuchi, of the Kamizuru clan, and granddaughter of the Sandame Tsuchikage," she answered honestly. If she was lucky, the Konoha shinobi would think twice about killing her considering who she was. "Wait, you mean you're Inoki's granddaughter? Damn, what are we gonna do now?" Anko said worriedly. She really didn't want this mission to be the end of her, and she really doubted that Danzo would give her a second chance. That old cripple was painfully strict when it came to candidates. "Calm down, Anko. Nothing bad is going to happen, isn't that right, Kuratsuchi-san?" Naruto said sternly. Kuratsuchi chuckled nervously. "Yeah, sure. If you guys just let me go, I won't hold a grudge." Kana shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we cannot just let you leave here now that you are aware of which one of us is the Jinchuriki. You will be coming with us, back to Konoha, where the Hokage will decide what will be done with you." "What? You can't do that," the IWA Kunoichi exclaimed angrily. Naruto and Kana instantly drew their swords and fell into their respective kinjutsu stances. "You will come with us peacefully, or we will use force. If you resist, we will be forced to kill you, and that is not something that we would like to do. Hopefully, with you meeting the Hokage, this situation can be salvaged peacefully. After all, peace between our villages would be beneficial," Kana explained, leaving no room for argument. This meeting wasn't even about peace. The IWA Council just wanted us to capture the Jinchuriki. Peace talks were not something we were even planning on. Taking me with you will do neither of us any good. At most, this will just anger IWA more and possibly start another war, Kuratsuchi yelled in frustration. Surely Inoki will be reasonable when it comes to the safety of his granddaughter. I don't think even he will risk a war over such a trivial matter, especially once Izo wakes up and explains why you're still alive. I don't want to sound too hopeful, but he usually kills anyone and everyone that would drop a tower on his head. Therefore, you must have given him good reason to leave you alive, if only by chance," Naruto said dryly. The girl's pink eyes narrowed at the blonde. Izo was far better company than these ones, even though she would never admit it. At least that guy had a personality. But now she was stuck dealing with an emotionless Jinchuriki, whom she wasn't entirely sure how powerful was, and some strict ANBU woman that seemed to be in control of aforementioned Jinchuriki. Kuratsuchi hadn't been able to pick up much from the one named Anko, but the fact that she was on this mission with them obvious said something about her skill. Kuratsuchi gritted her teeth and glared down at the ground. Her grandfather was going to break his back just screaming at her once he learned about what happened. It wasn't as if she had much of an option though, and she doubted her chances of getting all the way back to IWA in her condition. She slowly went to look up at her soon-to-be captors, only for her eyes to widen slightly. Right there, at their feet, were several of the explosives that lunatic from the Explosion's core had set up around that room. Kuratsuchi couldn't believe her luck. All she would have to do is flare her chakra slightly and boom, run as fast and far as she could while they were busy picking their pieces up. It was a little brutal to kill them in such a way, and it wouldn't surprise her if the Jinchuriki somehow survived it, but she really didn't want to get dragged to Konoha. Even if she was given back to IWA as a peace offering, the council would throw a hissy fit over it for months. Inoki would not appreciate her causing him even more problems than he already had. Kuratsuchi shivered at the thought of being demoted back to Genin. Dying was definitely a better option if that was the case. Before Naruto or Kana could react, Kuratsuchi raised her still usable arm into a half-snake seal and flared her chakra to the IWA standard level set for explosives. She smirked cruelly as she waited for the bombs to do their thing and give her a chance to escape, but after a few seconds of nothing she began to get nervous. She watched with narrowed eyes as the blonde kid leant down and picked up one of the small exploding tags at his feet. "I hoped you would be above such tactics," he said dryly as the air around the small scrap of paper wavered slightly before turning into a small piece of rubble. "If you try something like that again, we will kill you. Surrender while we're giving you the chance." Kuratsuchi glared at him defiantly. She was going to make her capture as painful as she could for them, even if she had to reduce herself to being a loud whiny bitch. They would not get out of this without some form of regret and mental torment. She sighed in defeat as she let her arm drop to her side, hanging her head in submission. Kana nodded as she sheathed her sword and turned to Anko, who had moved Izo into a more comfortable position amongst the rubble. "Anko, you're in charge of the prisoner. Bind her hands and start heading back to Konoha. Should she try anything stupid, stick with a paralysis poison and carry her. Do not cause her any unnecessary harm. We don't need that such a kid throwing a fit," the older woman ordered calmly. Anko groaned in mild protest as she walked towards Kuratsuchi. She wanted to be the one to carry Izo, if only for the chance of freaking him out once he woke up. Being stuck escorting an IWA brat was not something she would classify as a good thing. But she would do as she was told though, and she wouldn't dare let her more sadistic tendencies get the better of her when it came to the girl. Torturing the granddaughter of a Kage was one surefire way to get one's head caved in, or worse considering she was kunoichi. The snake mistress sauntered over to the IWA kunoichi and carefully went to tie her hands behind her back only to stop suddenly and frown. "I'll need to put your shoulder back into place before we get moving, so I suggest you get ready. This is going to hurt," she said casually. Kuratsuchi nodded in understanding and clenched her eyes tightly. Anko shrugged and grabbed the girl's arm roughly before quickly jarring it back into place, eliciting a pained whimper from her. The purple-haired woman quickly tied Kuratsuchi's hands behind her back, making sure to tie her fingers together so she couldn't make any hand seals. "Not bad, brat. I've known full-grown men that screamed like little girls after less pain than that, so you have my respect. For now," Anko said cheerfully. "Do you have enough chakra left to climb back up by yourself, or do I need to carry you?" she asked. The black-haired girl growled quietly. "I'll be fine by myself," she replied through gritted teeth. "Good girl. Now start moving," Anko ordered, pointing to side of the ravine that they had walked down. Naruto watched as Anko and Kuratsuchi leapt off towards the cliff face before turning back to Kana. Said woman was staring at Izo curiously and nudging him slightly with her foot. "How long do you think he'll be out this time?" she asked casually. The blonde shrugged. "No idea. I managed to stick the tag on him before he completely lost it, but I honestly can't time these things anymore. His episodes are getting much easier to trigger though, and I'm not sure how much longer he can keep this up. No doubt the old man will put us on lockdown in terms of ANBU missions, but I suppose that's just one benefit of being a genin," he said tiredly. Kana giggled quietly. "I guess you're still unhappy about being teamed up with Sasuke," she said in amusement. "Don't worry, I'm sure the Hokage will figure something out. Either that or the council will complain enough to get the teams reassigned. Having a genin team with 4 genin total is not exactly something that will go down well if you attempt the upcoming Chunin exams, if?" Naruto asked skeptically. "The council will all but demand that the Uchiha participate in the exams to showcase the power of Konoha. Those shriveled bastards are probably trying to figure out how to get Sasuke trained exclusively by Kakashi Sensei as we speak, the blonde ranted irritably. So, what exactly do you think was up with that girl? Aizo doesn't leave people alive on a whim, Kana said in concern. I don't know. But knowing Aizo, he'll probably say it was just because she was cute, or something along those lines anyway. Either way, it works out for us in the long run. Could you imagine the shitstorm that her death would cause? At least this way we can use her to make some kind of deal with IWA. Cammy knows we'll need it for when my real identity gets out. The blonde said exhaustedly. Do you really think IWA will react that badly? As you said, surely Inoki will be reasonable, she said with a raised eyebrow. I said he would be reasonable when it concerned his granddaughter. The son of the Yellow Flash, who is the equivalent of the Shinigami in IWA, not so much. It wouldn't surprise me if he came to take my head as a trophy with his own two hands, the young Jinchuriki exclaimed. You're so pessimistic, Naruto-chan. Now grab a leg and start dragging, Kana said cheerfully as she reached down and grabbed one of Aizo's legs. Don't you mean carry? Naruto asked curiously. Kana shook her head enthusiastically. Nope, I meant drag. He deserves it, she said in a disturbingly sweet tone. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. Who was he to argue with the woman? When Aizo woke up, he felt like he had fallen down a ravine inside a stone death trap. Oh wait, that did happen. When the hell did I black out though, he thought in confusion. Hey dumbass, you awake yet? Naruto asked a little too loudly for Aizo's liking. Said blindfolded boy groaned in pain. Naruto, I swear if I have to reteach you how to speak at a normal volume, I will personally drop you into the Kunoichi bathhouse, he drawled. Whoa. That sounds like a serious threat there, Anko said with a chuckle. It is a serious threat. Remember the incident 3 years ago? Kana asked in amusement. Anko turned to stare at Aizo with wide eyes. That was you, she yelled disbelievingly. Stop speaking so loud. If I have to tie you and the blonde brat together in just your underwear, I'll make sure that everyone, and I do mean everyone, gets a free copy of the pictures delivered to their house, Aizo threatened as he rolled over and tried to snuggle closer into the dirt. Big talk coming from a blind kid, Anko countered with a smirk before she noticed that Naruto was deathly pale. What's up with you, blondie? You have my sympathy, Anko, he muttered fearfully. Mine as well, Kana added idly. Anko stared at the two of them curiously. What the hell are you guys talking about? She asked. Neither of the Uzumakis replied, and so the snake user shrugged it off as them trying to play her for a fool or something, but she froze when she turned back to look at Aizo. The boy was now sitting up straight and staring at her with a creepy and malicious grin, which was only further enhanced by the flickering light of the nearby fire. She was slightly curious about why the kid had seemingly filed his teeth into points, but she couldn't deny the effectiveness of them in the intimidation factor. I accept the challenge, Aizo said cheerfully, freaking out the purple-haired woman even more and confusing her as well. Aizo decided to use this moment of confusion to observe his new surroundings. It seemed that they had long since left the ravine and had started heading back to Konoha, judging from the trees that surrounded them. He guessed that they had at least made it back into fire country. The team was currently in a small clearing with a small fire burning in the center of it, with him and Anko sitting together on one side, and Naruto and Kana relaxing on the other side. Kuratsuchi was tied to a tree at the edge of the clearing. Why is Kuro-chan here? He asked curiously. Told you he thought she was cute, Naruto exclaimed. Anko grumbled some choice curses and threw a small roll of Ryo to the blonde boy, who snatched it out of the air in a much too happy fashion before quickly starting to count it. The snake mistress turned and glared at Aizo hatefully. You owe me, brat, she growled. What the hell are you talking about? I only just woke up, the ash-haired boy exclaimed indignantly before pausing suddenly. Why exactly did I just wake up? Did something happen? You had another episode, Naruto answered blandly. Aizo chuckled and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. I didn't hurt Kuro-chan, did I? He asked hesitantly. Naruto sighed. No, you didn't hurt her. I got to you just as you were about to completely lose it and stuck you with one of those ceiling tags you made. However, you really need to stop straining yourself like that, Izo. Showing off or not, we can't afford to constantly keep an eye on you. At least one of us has to stay in control of themselves at all times, and you know damn well that it can't be me, for obvious reasons, the blonde explained. Yeah, I know. But at least this time I had an excuse. I mean, the girl did drop several hundred tons of stone down on top of my head, Izo defended. Speaking of the girl, why exactly is she still alive? We found 3 others amongst the rubble that had been dead for some time, and 1 other who was crushed to death, probably your handiwork if I were to hazard a guess. But you left Kuratsuchi alive, even after she brought the trap down on you. Why? Kana asked curiously. Such a kid's granddaughter, the boy replied dumbly. Ha, hand the money back, Blondie. Anko yelled triumphantly. And she's cute, Izo added with a shrug. Anko's happy expression fell from her face as a small snake slowly slithered out of her long sleeve. Without hesitation, the woman extended her hand out towards Izo, launching the small snake at the boy. She grinned viciously as her deadly little pet did its job, sinking its small but lethal fangs right into the brat's shoulder and pumping more than enough venom into him to render him completely useless. Her grin dropped quickly though once she realized that Izo wasn't even reacting. Izo calmly reached up and removed the small reptile from his shoulder before staring at its master blankly. Anko, I do hope you haven't forgotten that I too was in contact with Orochimaru for some time. It would stand to reason that snake venom, no matter what type, has little to no effect on me, he said. Emotionlessly. Tisk, whatever. Just keep in mind that I'm going to get my revenge for this. My money will be avenged, the snake mistress hissed. Okay, Doc, can someone explain why Kuro-chan is here now? Izo repeated curiously. You said it yourself, she's the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage, and a valuable bargaining piece considering how our meeting with IWA turned out. We're taking her with us back to Konoha to speak with the Hokage. If we're lucky, this mess can be turned in our favor, Kana explained calmly. And she's unconscious, why? The blindfolded boy asked. Kana shrugged. She was complaining about being tied to a tree, so I gave Anko the freedom to use a strong sedative on her. The girl is surprisingly stubborn, reminds me a bit of you 2-inch, she said casually, gesturing to Naruto and Izo. I regret nothing. Izo exclaimed proudly. Don't put me in the same boat as him, it's not fair, Naruto whined pitifully. You guys really need counseling, Anko stated bluntly. All 3 Uzumaki turned and stared at her blankly from behind their masks and blindfold. You stay out of this, they said in unison. Anko huffed and turned her head from her teammates as they all returned to staring at each other, seemingly beginning a 3-way glaring match between themselves. The staring contest lasted for several minutes, during which Anko considered throwing an exploding tag in the middle of them. The snake user, thankfully, decided against it since she found that she rather enjoyed being among the living, even if she had to deal with a family of idiots. Eventually though, and to Anko's surprise, Naruto simply fell backwards from his seated position and passed out on the ground. Damn it! Izo yelled. Kana giggled softly. I guess that means that you have first watch, Izo. I'd suggest you work on your genjutsu in your spare time if you ever want to beat me, the older woman said smugly. What just happened? Anko asked in confusion. Izo pouted and crossed his arms. Me and Kana have little genjutsu battles to see who can knock Naruto out first. It's sort of like our own personal scissors, paper, rock type thing. We use it to settle multiple disputes, including and not limited to things like who gets watch duty, who gets to fight the strong opponent, and who gets the last piece of cake, he explained crossly. Of course I never win, and Naruto doesn't get a say in the matter. Basically it's just me waiting to get bossed around by her, Anko sniggered. You're a mummy's boy, no doubt about it, she said amusedly. You have no idea, if Kana chuckled. I once managed to get him to make me breakfast every morning for a month before he realized I was just using him. It was so cute, she squealed. You took advantage of me in a moment of weakness. I was still getting used to the way the real world worked and you manipulated me. I will never forgive you for that. Izo exclaimed childishly. Yes, you will, you. Love me too much to hold such a petty grudge, the woman said, waving the blindfolded boy off dismissively. I hate you so very, very much, he muttered irritably. Izo sighed and stood up, stretching his arms and legs and cracking his neck and back several times, much to the annoyance of Kana and Anko. Why does it feel like you guys dragged me here? He asked accusingly. Kana shrugged, thanking Cammy that her ANBU mask hid the disturbingly wide grin plastered on her face. Anko, however, was not so well protected and had her grin on display for all to see. Izo decided not to ask any further questions lest he uncover anything else unfortunate that had befallen him during his nap. He really didn't want to find out that Naruto and Kana let Anko do anything to him while he was unconscious. He shivered at the idea of that woman getting too close to him. Sure, she was fun to joke around with, but that was where the line was drawn in the sand. The team gave a lazy salute to the two women before leaping off into the trees, going as far from the camp as he could. The benefit of being a skilled sensor was that you didn't need to be close to people to keep an eye on them. It made night watch actually somewhat pleasant. No annoying people to interrupt his late-night reading. Speaking of which, Izo chuckled quietly as he quickly stopped and lounged himself comfortably in one of the nearby trees. He reached out with his sensing and made sure that he was still in range to keep an eye on things before nodding to himself and pulling out a small orange-covered book. Ah, Jiraiya. A useless godfather you may be, but a literary genius you most certainly are, he said in content. But I'm still gonna kick your ass one day, he muttered as he delved into the glorious world of Ika. Back at the camp, Anko pulled out a kunai and smirked, preparing to chase after a certain blind brat. There was no way in hell she was going to let him go like that without making him suffer for making her lose that bet with Blondie. Just as she was about to go after her next victim, a hand reached out and grabbed her arm. Anko turned and glared at Kana, who she could just tell was smirking underneath that mask. I wouldn't go chasing Izo in the dark, Anko. Stealth is not something you want to challenge him in, and he would sense you well before you got anywhere close to finding him. Trust me on this, it will only end in your own humiliation, the older woman lectured. Anko hissed in annoyance. Although she did hold a level of confidence in her own abilities, she wasn't stupid enough to mess with a full-fledged fall member. Even if the brat was several years her junior, that wasn't necessarily something that worked in her favor. One didn't make it into fall without some serious skills to back them up. Hell, most didn't make it into root without some seriously kick-ass skills in at least one shinobi field. She sighed in resignation. She would leave the brat for now, but as soon as the opportunity presented itself, she would make him wish he was never born, or created, or whatever he was. It was all just a matter of time now. Uncomfortable would not even begin to describe how Kuratsuchi felt when she woke up. This was definitely going down in her books as the worst day of her life so far. Her team had been killed, she had been used as a hostage, she dropped a tower on herself, she got captured by Konoha Shinobi, she was drugged, and now she was waking up tied to a tree. Yep, today was most certainly the definition of a shitty day. It really didn't help that the crazy purple-haired woman had purposely tied the ropes too tight in certain areas. She would have to add that one to her kill list later. For now, though, she was stuck as their prisoner. When she thought about it, things could have been much, much worse for her. All things considered, of course. The team that captured her could have been made up of particularly desperate men to whom her age would mean very little, but that was a worst-case scenario. What she had seen of her captors so far wasn't exactly comforting her, though. As far as she could tell, she was stuck with a powerful freak of nature who seemed to have had some form of mental breakdown, an emotionless Jinchuriki who was able to effortlessly overpower a aforementioned freak of nature, a sadistic and perverted woman, and some level-headed ANBU woman who thankfully seemed to be in charge of the rest of them. Kuratsuchi wasn't sure how long she had been out for, but judging from the smoldering remains of a fire, she guessed several hours at least. Looking around, Kuratsuchi was able to spot 3 of her 4 captors. She could see the ANBU woman resting against a tree on the other side of the clearing, her sword resting in her lap. She wouldn't put it past the woman to have ridiculous reflexes with that thing, so it would be best to keep an eye on her. Not too far from her was the purple-haired pervert, who was sprawled out carelessly next to what remained of the fire. The woman's attire, or rather lack of, made for a rather explicit image due to the way she had sprawled herself out. The freak of nature, and possibly mentally unstable one, was resting up against a tree much like the ANBU woman, with his own sword, that Kuratsuchi had not seen him with before, resting against the tree next to him. The IWA Kunoichi rolled her eyes at the boy's lack of preparation. The ANBU woman was clearly ready, even while unconscious, for anything. The purple-haired woman, although seemingly carefree, was actually just as prepared as the ANBU one, with kunai held loosely in her hands as she slept. The blindfolded boy, though, was simply relaxed, as if he felt that he didn't need to be on edge for anything at all. Kuratsuchi thought that he would have learnt not to be so cocky considering she had almost killed him earlier that day, or at least she hoped she had almost killed him. Considering she had come out of the rubble in far worse shape than he had, it was arguable about how effective the trap was on him. It unnerved her slightly that he was able to shrug off such a fall so easily and still have the energy to have a mental breakdown right in front of her. Perhaps Konoha Shinobi were just as insane as some of the stories said they were. "You want someone to talk to?" Naruto asked emotionlessly from beside her. Kuratsuchi jumped, or at least tried to. It proved difficult when you were tied to a tree. She glared at the blonde boy with the fox-styled mask who had somehow managed to sneak up on her without her noticing. It seemed she would need to invest some more time into her training if she was being caught off guard by kids younger than she was. This one freaked her out more than the perverted woman, and for good reason too. She didn't think she would be able to forget the malicious and oppressive aura that he had exuded when he swatted his teammate down like a fly. She was no real stranger to the concept of a Jinchuriki or the Bijou themselves, but she was not prepared for how suffocatingly powerful either of them could be in person. She was somewhat thankful that Iwa's Jinchuriki were kept away from the village, even if it wasn't exactly by their choice. Kuratsuchi took her chance to observe the Jinchuriki, and she wasn't entirely impressed. Although the kid had proven his power by taking down the one she claimed was a freak of nature, he didn't seem to give off any notable vibes of power. If anything, the kid was giving off a calming aura. "Well?" the blonde questioned again. The girl glared at him. "So, you're the Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi," she commented blandly. "I was expecting someone." More Naruto shrugged. "I wasn't expecting you either, considering you're practically IWA royalty," he replied dryly. Kuratsuchi sneered. "Royalty? Ha, flattery will get you nowhere, kid," she growled. "In case you hadn't noticed, but the crazy purple-haired one and my brother are the seduction members of this team. Albeit my brother has a tendency to fail miserably in that field," the Jinchuriki droned tiredly. A calm but slightly awkward silence swept over the camp once again as Kuratsuchi tried to ignore the blonde that was casually standing next to her. Unfortunately, her curiosity got the better of her and she ended up with several questions running through her mind that all begged to be answered. One question, however, was close to screaming at her, and she knew that it was the first thing she had to find out if she could. "What was it?" she asked quietly. Naruto turned to look at her lazily. "Do you want to elaborate on that?" he drawled. "Before you stopped him, what was that feeling?" "It wasn't killing intent, but it was similar. It was so sickening, I felt like I was going to vomit." "I've never felt anything like that before," she said hesitantly. Naruto sighed deeply. "That was his chakra, nothing more, nothing less," he answered simply. Kuratsuchi's eyes widened slightly. "He's a Jinchuriki as well?" she asked in shock. The blonde shook his head in amusement. "No, he isn't. But if you ever say that around him, I'm sure he'll thank you for the compliment. As for his chakra, well, that's just how it is." A few years ago, it started to gain a sicklier aura to it until he ended up with what you felt today. Kuratsuchi smirked smugly. You seem pretty confident in telling me all of this about your dear brother. Aren't you afraid that I'll tell my grandfather and have him hunted down? She asked threateningly. Not really. If he was awake right now, I have no doubt that he would be explaining the same thing to you. I'm certain that you witnessed at least some of his abilities when you were in that tower, so telling you that his chakra feels gross doesn't really make much of a difference now, does it? He said casually. That, and I have a feeling that the old man will have certain things erased from your memory concerning all of us. Nothing personal, of course. We just can't let you run around telling everyone that Konoha has a shinobi who can throw Kekkai Genkai around as if he was in a food fight, old man. Kuratsuchi questioned with a raised eyebrow. Naruto chuckled nervously and scratched his head sheepishly. Yeah, that's what I call the Hokage. It's become a little waiting game to see how long it takes before he finally snaps at me for it, and he lets you get away with that, she asked disbelievingly. So far, yes, the blonde answered unsurely. I should probably keep an eye on the old man for a while. I can't help but feel like he will use my official jonin status against me as some form of twisted revenge. If he makes me catch that cat, he will regret it, Naruto thought suspiciously. You tree huggers are too soft. Even your esteemed leader lets his shinobi get away with too much. It's almost laughable how relaxed your brother is even after I tried to kill him, she muttered. Naruto quirked an eyebrow at that, not that she could see it, of course. Would you be willing to attack him if you were free? He asked curiously. Kuratsuchi frowned at that. All things considered, she wasn't entirely sure if she would attack him. If he was able to survive the trap, then it stood to reason that he could survive whatever she would be able to throw at him in her current state. She wasn't confident in her ability to take on a guy that could snap and go crazy on her at a moment's notice like before, and she highly doubted that the Jinchuriki kid would be willing to stop him again. No, I guess not, she replied in a defeated tone. Good, 'cause I really don't want there to be a war between our villages just because one girl decided to get herself killed, the blonde said dryly. The girl chuckled mirthlessly. Well, aren't you just a big ray of sunshine? Using sarcasm is ineffective. I suggest you change tactics, unless you want to talk to Aizo again. Sarcasm actually works on him sometimes, Naruto said casually. Kuratsuchi deadpanned at the boy. You guys are all weirdos, except for the ANBU woman. She seems at least normal, she said in a dull tone. Naruto couldn't help but grin behind his mask. This girl was going to regret saying that. It's good you think that, because she's got next shift. Word of advice, do not try to ignore her, it'll only make her double her efforts, he warned calmly before walking towards the masked woman. Naruto stopped a few feet in front of Kana and leant down to pick up a small rock. Without even pausing in his movements, the blonde lazily threw the small rock at the masked woman, to which Kuratsuchi couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at. A soft clanging noise echoed through the clearing as Kana unsheathed her sword and swatted the stone away with disturbing ease. Kuratsuchi had to give the woman credit. It took quite a lot of dedication to develop those kinds of reflexes for multiple life or death situation. She wouldn't rule out the latter, but she would definitely keep her eye on the woman. Could you not have woken me up in a more appropriate way? Kana drawled tiredly. Nope. It's your shift, and the girl is awake. I figured you would be able to make better company than me, you know, with girl talk and all, Naruto said with a shrug. Couldn't you have gotten Anko? She's a girl too, the woman whined. I don't want to be blamed should our resident psychopath decide to do unpleasant things to our very important prisoner, the blonde stated. Okay, I get it. You go to sleep, I've got things covered, Kana mumbled as she stood up and stretched. Naruto nodded before walking over to a particularly soft-looking patch of grass, which was strategically positioned away from the crazy snake lady. Kana shook her head at the boy's antics as he continued to send cautious glances to their purple-haired teammate. Eventually, the blonde lied down and relaxed. Mostly. Kana shrugged before sauntering over to the less than cheerful Kuratsuchi, sitting down next to the girl with a deep sigh. So she began awkwardly. Do you like to read? Kana asked curiously. Kuratsuchi stared at the woman blankly. Compared to her calm and collected attitude earlier, she was acting far too pleasant for the Iwa Kunoichi's liking. I suppose, the girl answered apprehensively. Kana nodded her head happily. Are you familiar with the works of the legendary Sannin, Jiraiya? She asked cheerfully. No, Kuratsuchi replied unsurely. The older woman gasped in shock as she stared wide-eyed at the girl. Well, that simply will not do. I fear that I must educate you, my dear, on the literary excellence that is Ika, she exclaimed. Kuratsuchi watched as Kana reached into her weapons pouch and pulled out a small orange-covered book. The girl's eyes widened to comical proportions as she remembered why that title sounded so familiar. That's the book that I always catch Gramps reading in his office, the one that he always giggles at, she thought in surprise. Now don't worry if some things don't make perfect sense. You are still very young after all, so I don't expect you to understand absolutely everything. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask me, okay? I'll be happy to explain anything as best as I can, Kana said cheerfully as she opened the book to the first page. This must be some twisted torture method, it has to be. What kind of women do they raise in Konoha, and why are they all perverts? Kuratsuchi thought in a panic. Kana simply smirked from behind her mask. This is going to be beautiful. I get to destroy yet another girl's innocence. In your face, Anko, she cheered mentally. Welcome to the dark side, my dear. We have more fun, the masked woman whispered mischievously. And so began the longest night of Kuratsuchi's life. She still wouldn't be able to manage anything more than inane muttering for several hours, even when under threat of agonizing death from Anko to shut up. Naruto and Izo made the wise decision to remain silent after waking up. They knew what had transpired. Kana's perverse and slightly mad giggling had explained everything clearer than glass. Thin and amazingly fragile glass, much like what was left of Kuratsuchi's sanity. Poor girl never stood a chance.
That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.